The office of Ethelred and Finch was always buzzing, but it was a nervous kind of energy. It was the sound of phones ringing, keyboards clacking, and most of all, it was the sound of one man's voice. The boss, a man everyone called Mr. Finch, was a man who loved the sound of his own ideas. He was young, maybe in his early 30s, and he carried himself like a man who had already conquered the world. His laugh was loud, his suits were expensive, and he had a habit of talking to everyone as if they were part of a grand audience for his life. Moving quietly through this noisy world was a man named Leo. He was the office manager. If you worked at Ethelred and Finch, you knew Leo. He was the one who made sure your computer was working when it crashed right before a big deadline. He was the one who found the special kind of coffee you liked and made sure it was always in the kitchen. He was the one who listened with a kind and patient face when people were stressed or upset. Leo was not a young man. The lines on his face spoke of years of experience, but he never bragged or tried to take credit. He just did his work smoothly and quietly, like the steady heartbeat of the office. While Mr. Finch was all sharp angles and loud noises, Leo was all soft edges and calm silence. One Tuesday afternoon, the air in the office was particularly thick with tension. Mr. Finch was pacing near the large window that overlooked the city, explaining a new, complicated project to a group of tired-looking employees. His voice bounced off the walls. "And that's why we need to think bigger, bolder," he declared, slapping a hand on the whiteboard. Leo was nearby, carefully restocking the printer with paper. He moved without a sound, a skill he had perfected over many years. He was focused on his task, making sure the paper was perfectly aligned so it wouldn't jam. He didn't seem to notice the boss's performance, but Mr. Finch noticed him. His eyes, always scanning the room, landed on Leo. He saw a man doing a simple, quiet job, and a thought seemed to occur to him. A smile played on his lips, the kind of smile that usually meant he was about to make a joke. And someone else was the punchline. "Speaking of thinking big," Mr. Finch said, his voice cutting through his own presentation. "What about our man Leo here? The glue that holds this whole place together." All eyes turned to Leo. He paused, a stack of paper in his hands, and looked up. He didn't seem surprised or nervous, just attentive. Mr. Finch walked over, his shoes making a firm sound on the floor. "We're finalizing plans for the company retreat next month. You know, the one at the big lodge. There's going to be a talent show, a real team-building exercise. Gets everyone out of their shell." He stopped in front of Leo, looking him up and down in a friendly but slightly mocking way. "So, Leo, you've got to have a hidden talent. Everyone does. What's your party trick? Can you juggle pens? Do a little dance? Maybe you're a secret comedian?" A few people in the room let out soft, nervous laughs. They liked Leo, he was helpful and kind. But they also knew better than to not laugh when the boss was making a joke. Leo placed the last stack of paper neatly into the tray. He looked at Mr. Finch and offered a small, gentle smile. It was a smile that didn't give much away. "I dabble, Mr. Finch," he said, his voice calm and even. "Nothing that would be of any note for a show." "Oh, come on now." Mr. Finch chuckled, turning to the room as if to include everyone in his fun. "Don't be shy. A man of your experience must have picked up a skill or two. What do you do to relax?" Leo's eyes seemed to look at something far away for just a second. It was a quick flicker, so fast that if you blinked you would have missed it. Then it was gone, and his calm, present-day expression was back. "Really, sir?" he said, wiping a tiny bit of dust from the top of the printer. "It's nothing. I'm much better at making sure the presentations run smoothly than I would be at being in one." Mr. Finch laughed again, a big booming sound. He clapped a hand on Leo's shoulder. All right. We'll let you off the hook for now. But think about it. Ethelred and Finch is all about discovering hidden potential." He turned back to his captivated audience, already moving on to his next big idea. The moment was over. The employees turned their attention back to their boss, the excitement passed. Leo stood there for another moment, his hand resting on the printer. The room was once again filled with the sound of Mr. Finch's voice, but Leo seemed to be listening to a different, much quieter sound in his own head. He then nodded to himself, a small, almost invisible movement, and went back to his work, moving silently through the office. The quiet man with a secret the loudest person in the room could never even begin to imagine. The company retreat arrived on a crisp, sunny weekend. The lodge was exactly the kind of place the boss loved. It looked rustic and simple on the outside, but inside everything was modern, expensive, and designed to impress. There were large wooden beams across the ceiling and a huge stone fireplace. And tucked away in a corner of the main hall, almost like a piece of fancy furniture, stood a grand piano. Its dark, polished wood shone under the lights, but it seemed lonely. No one had touched it all weekend. It was just there for decoration. The air in the hall was a mix of relaxation and low-level anxiety. Everyone was happy to be out of the office, but they all knew what was coming that evening: the talent show. It was supposed to be fun, a way to build team spirit, but for many it felt like a test. People huddled in small groups, talking in low voices about what they were going to do. Some had decided to sing a popular song together. Two guys from the accounting department were practicing a magic trick that kept going wrong. There was a lot of nervous laughter. The boss, Mr. Finch, was in his element. He moved from group to group, a glass of whiskey in his hand, slapping backs and telling everyone to loosen up. He was the sun around which this little office planet orbited, and he loved the warmth of everyone's attention. Leo, as usual, was on the edges. He wasn't standing alone, but he wasn't in the center of any group either. He had helped the event organizers set up the sound system earlier, and was now just watching the room, a calm expression on his face. He looked comfortable in his simple clothes, a world away from the boss's bright branded polo shirt. As the evening went on, the talent show began. One by one, people took their turn in the spotlight. The accounting duo did their magic trick, and it was charming when they fumbled it. A group from the marketing team sang a pop song, their voices shaky but full of enthusiasm. Someone told a few jokes. Each performance was met with warm, encouraging applause from their colleagues. It was, for the most part, genuinely fun and lighthearted. Then it was the boss's turn. He put down his glass, smoothed his shirt, and walked to the front of the room with the confidence of a professional performer. The applause for him was the loudest yet. He grabbed the microphone. "I'm not one to shy away from a challenge," he announced, and people laughed. He sang a rock song. He wasn't a terrible singer, but he wasn't a great one either. What he lacked in skill, he made up for in sheer volume and energy, putting on a full performance, pointing at people in the crowd and making dramatic gestures. When he finished, he took a deep, theatrical bow as the room erupted in cheers and whistles. His face was flushed with success and the glow of the whiskey. He held the microphone, basking in the applause, his eyes scanning the happy, relieved faces of his employees. And then, just like in the office a few weeks before, his eyes found Leo. Leo was standing near the back by the door to the kitchen, his arms crossed, offering a small, polite clap. A familiar, teasing smile spread across the boss's face. The success of his own performance had filled him with a generous but dangerous sense of fun. All right, thank you," he said into the microphone, quieting the crowd. "But now I think it's time we see some real talent." He paused for effect, letting his gaze linger on Leo. "Come on, Leo. You've been hiding back there all night. Your team needs you. Get up here." A wave of supportive but slightly nervous cheers went through the room. "Yeah, Leo," someone shouted. Leo shook his head, his polite smile firmly in place. He waved a hand, a clear, "No, thank you." But the boss was not one to take no for an answer, especially when he had an audience. This was the grand finale he hadn't planned. He chuckled, a low sound that was amplified by the microphone throughout the hall. "What's the matter?" he said, his tone dripping with playful mockery. "Stage fright? Don't worry, we don't bite." He stepped away from the center of the room and started walking slowly, purposefully, towards the grand piano in the corner. The crowd watched, curious. He stopped next to the beautiful, silent instrument and slapped its lid with his open palm. The sound was a loud, dull thump that made a few people jump. "Tell you what, Leo," the boss said, his voice booming. "I'll make you a deal." He was clearly enjoying this now, playing to the crowd. He pointed a finger down at the floor directly in front of the piano. "If you can play something, not just a nursery rhyme, mind you, I want to hear something fierce, something with passion. If you can play something truly fierce on this thing, I'll bow right here." He said the last words slowly and loudly, emphasizing his promise. The room exploded in laughter and clapping. It seemed like the funniest, most outrageous thing they had ever heard. The image of their powerful, confident boss bowing to their quiet, gentle office manager was a hilarious joke. They all knew it was just a bit of fun, a way to get their shy colleague to participate. No one, especially the boss, thought for a second that the challenge was real. All the sound in the room, the laughing, the chatting, the clapping, seemed to fade into a muffled background hum. All eyes were on Leo. He was no longer smiling. He wasn't frowning either. He just looked serious. He looked from the laughing face of his boss to the majestic, silent piano. For a long, heavy moment, he didn't move at all. He just stood there, considering the man, the challenge, and the instrument. The laughter began to die down, replaced by a tense, curious silence. They had expected him to laugh it off or shake his head again. But he wasn't doing that. He was just thinking. The air in the room suddenly felt very different. The joke was over. Something else was about to begin. The silence in the room became a living thing. It was heavy and thick, and it seemed to press down on everyone. The cheerful, relaxed feeling from just a minute before had completely vanished. Now there was only a tense waiting. All the friendly laughter was gone, replaced by the quiet hum of the air conditioning and the soft rustle of people shifting their weight. Every single person was looking at Leo. He was still standing near the back, his body perfectly still. His eyes were fixed on the grand piano. It was as if he and the instrument were the only two things in the entire hall. The boss, Mr. Finch, was still standing by the piano, his hand resting on its lid. His confident, teasing smile had started to fade, replaced by a look of slight confusion. This was not the reaction he had expected. He had thought Leo would just shake his head and everyone would have a good-natured laugh. This long, heavy silence was making him uncomfortable. "Come on, Leo, don't be a spoilsport," the boss said, trying to force a chuckle. But his laugh sounded hollow and strange in the quiet room. It didn't break the tension. It only made it worse. Slowly, very slowly, Leo began to move. It wasn't a rushed walk. It was a calm, deliberate walk. He didn't look at any of his colleagues as he passed them. He didn't look at the boss. His eyes never left the piano. As he walked through the crowd, people moved aside to make a path for him. They watched him with a mixture of curiosity and worry. Was he angry? Was he about to do something embarrassing? No one knew. With each step he took, the man they thought they knew seemed to change. The slight slouch he sometimes had from leaning over computers was gone. His shoulders straightened. His head, usually slightly bowed in a polite, listening way, was held high. The kind, slightly tired look in his eyes was replaced by a sharp, focused intensity. It was like watching a soldier transform from a civilian just by putting on a uniform. He reached the piano. He didn't look at the boss, who was now watching him with a puzzled frown. Leo's entire attention was on the instrument. He reached out his right hand and, with a tenderness that was surprising, he ran his fingertips along the smooth, polished wood of the piano's side. It was not the slap of the boss's hand. It was a caress. It was the touch of someone who knew this object, who respected it. Then he pulled out the piano bench. He sat down. The moment he sat, his posture changed completely. The office worker was gone. In his place sat a performer. His back was straight but not stiff. His shoulders were relaxed, but there was a readiness in them, like a runner waiting for the starting gun. He lifted the cover from the keys. The white and black keys lay before him waiting. He just looked at them for a moment, his hands resting on his knees. The room was so quiet you could hear the sound of people breathing. He lifted his hands and held them just above the keys. His fingers, which usually handled printers and staplers, were now poised like those of a surgeon before an operation. There was no hesitation in them. They looked strong and capable. He closed his eyes. He took one deep, slow breath and let it out. In that breath, it seemed he let go of everything. The office, the retreat, the laughing, the boss. He was somewhere else now. He was in a world made of music that only he could hear. The boss, standing a few feet away, opened his mouth as if to say something else, to make another joke to break this weird moment. But then he closed it. The look on Leo's face stopped him. It was a look of such deep concentration and peace that it felt wrong to disturb it. For the first time all night, the boss had nothing to say. Leo's fingers finally touched the keys. It wasn't a chord. It wasn't the start of a song. It was just a single soft note. Then another. A few quiet, wandering notes that trickled out into the silence like drops of water. They were delicate and complex. A little melody that seemed to be asking a question. It was beautiful, but it was only a whisper, a hint of what was to come. It was like the calm before a storm. People in the audience glanced at each other. This was nice. It was pleasant. It was certainly better than they had expected. But it wasn't fierce. The boss's shoulders relaxed a little. Maybe this would be okay. Maybe Leo really did just dabble. But then Leo's body tensed. His eyebrows drew together in concentration. The gentle, wandering melody came to a pause. And then, the storm began. The quiet, delicate notes hung in the air for a final second, a beautiful and fragile thread of sound. Then Leo's hands came down on the keyboard and that thread exploded into a storm. It was not just music. It was a force. A wave of powerful, complex sound rushed out from the piano and filled every corner of the hall. The gentleman at the piano was gone. In his place was a virtuoso, a master of his instrument. His body moved with the music, his shoulders leaning into the phrases, his head nodding with the rhythm he was creating. His fingers were a blur. They flew across the black and white keys with a speed and precision that seemed impossible. They leaped from the low, thundering notes that shook the floor to the high, sparkling notes that seemed to dance in the air. It was not one hand playing a melody and the other doing simple accompaniment. Both of his hands were independent, yet perfectly together, creating a rich, complicated tapestry of sound. The piece was joyful and furious, playful and intense, all at the same time. The melody was like a frantic, beautiful dance, with notes that seemed to chase each other up and down the keyboard. It was fast and technical, but it wasn't just noise. There was a deep, powerful emotion behind every note. You could hear a story in it, a story of struggle, of triumph, of incredible passion that had been locked away for a very long time. People in the audience were frozen. Their mouths were slightly open. Their eyes were wide. The woman who had sung the pop song earlier stared, her hand unconsciously covering her mouth. The two men from accounting who had fumbled their magic trick were leaning forward, their elbows on their knees, completely captivated. No one whispered. No one moved. They were all holding their breath, caught in the spell of the music. They were not just hearing a song. They were witnessing a secret being revealed. The man they passed in the hallway every day, the man who fixed the copier and ordered paper clips, had this incredible universe inside of him. This was not dabbling. This was a lifetime of skill. This was art. The boss, Mr. Finch, stood exactly where he had been, his back now against the wall. The confident, slightly mocking expression had been completely wiped from his face. He looked pale. His glass of whiskey was forgotten in his hand. He watched not the piano but Leo's face. He saw the focus, the passion, the absolute command. This was not the quiet, compliant office manager. This was a man in complete control of his world, a world the boss could never even understand. The music built and built, getting faster and more powerful. It was like a rushing river, sweeping everyone along with it. You could feel the vibration of the low notes in your chest. The high notes were so clear and sharp they sent shivers down your spine. Leo's feet worked the pedals, making the notes ring out and blend together into a magnificent roaring sound. He played passages that sounded like 3 hands were on the keyboard, not just 2. His left hand jumped and ran across the bass notes, providing a powerful foundation, while his right hand executed dizzying, sparkling runs that seemed to defy physics. It was fierce. It was more than fierce. It was a breathtaking display of power and grace that left no room for doubt. This was the answer to the challenge. This was the something fierce he had been asked to play. And with every passing second, with every incredible run of notes, the boss's joking promise, "I'll bow right here," echoed in the silent, stunned minds of everyone in the room. It was no longer a joke. It had become a serious debt that needed to be paid. The music rushed towards its finale, a thrilling, heart-pounding race to the end. Leo's entire body was invested in the performance, pouring every bit of energy and feeling into the instrument. He was no longer in a lodge at a company retreat. He was on the greatest stage of his life, and he was playing as if his very soul depended on it. The storm was reaching its peak, and everyone was powerless within it. The music was a living thing now, a great powerful beast that Leo had unleashed. It filled the room so completely that there was no space left for anything else. No thoughts of work, no memories of the awkward magic trick, no sound of the crackling fireplace. There was only the storm of notes. Leo was at the very heart of that storm. His fingers, a blur of motion, danced and hammered and flew across the keys. It didn't look like he was thinking anymore. It looked like the music was just flowing through him, from some deep place inside him straight out into the piano. His face was a mask of pure concentration, his body moving with the rhythm, leaning into the loud, passionate parts, pulling back for the brief, soft moments that made the powerful parts feel even stronger. Everyone was held perfectly still, trapped in the beauty and the shock of it. They watched the man they knew as the quiet, helpful office manager completely disappear. In his place was a stranger, an artist of incredible skill. It was like watching a superhero take off his normal clothes and reveal the costume underneath. They had seen this man every day for years and had never known who he really was. The boss, Mr. Finch, had not moved an inch. He was still leaning against the wall, his body stiff. The glass in his hand felt heavy and cold. He couldn't look away from Leo. The confident, joking feeling he had just a few minutes ago was gone, replaced by a cold, sinking feeling in his stomach. His own words echoed in his head. "If you can play something fierce, I'll bow right here." He had said it as a joke, a fun way to tease a shy employee. He never for a single second imagined this. This wasn't just playing the piano. This was a kind of magic. This was a language of passion and skill that he himself could never speak. He felt very small. The power he had in the office, the fancy title, the expensive clothes, it all felt meaningless next to this raw, real talent. His eyes dropped from Leo's face to the spot on the floor. The exact spot where he had slapped his hand and made his loud promise. In that moment, he wasn't the boss anymore. He was just a man who had deeply misjudged another man. A wave of shame washed over him, hot and uncomfortable. He had mocked this. He had laughed at the possibility. And now the reality was so much more powerful than he could have ever dreamed. The music began to climb towards its end. The notes came faster and louder, piling on top of one another in a thrilling, heart-pounding race. It was like a great story rushing towards its final chapter. The sound was so big it seemed to shake the very air. People in the audience were leaning forward, their hands clenched, their hearts beating fast. They could feel the ending coming. And then, it happened. Leo's hands flew up for one final incredible run down the keyboard, and then came down together in a mighty, crashing chord. The sound was immense, a final thunderclap that rang through the hall. He held the chord, letting it vibrate and fill every last bit of space. And then with a slow, deliberate motion, he lifted his hands from the keys and let them rest in his lap. The music stopped. The silence that followed was even more powerful than the music had been. It was a thick, heavy silence full of the ghost of the sound that had just ended. No one clapped. No one moved. No one even seemed to breathe. The transition from that roaring storm of sound to this absolute quiet was jarring. It was like the whole world had been holding its breath and had forgotten to let it out. Leo sat perfectly still on the piano bench, his head slightly bowed. His shoulders rose and fell slowly as he caught his breath. He looked like a man who had just run a long, hard race. He didn't look at the audience. He didn't look at the boss. He just looked at the piano keys as if saying a quiet thank you to the instrument. The spell was broken by the sound of a single, sharp clap, then another, and then, as if a dam had broken, the entire room erupted into the loudest, most genuine applause of the entire night. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was a roaring, cheering, whistling ovation. People were on their feet, their faces filled with awe and respect, but in the middle of all that noise, one person was completely silent. The boss. He was still staring at the spot on the floor. The applause washed over him, but he didn't hear it. He was lost in his own thoughts. The challenge had been met completely and utterly. The promise had been made in front of everyone, and everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. The bow had not been performed with his body, but in that moment, with the incredible music still ringing in everyone's ears, it felt like his spirit had already bowed 1,000 times. The applause thundered through the hall for a long time. It was not the kind of applause that dies down quickly. It was a new kind of respect. They had seen something truly special, something they would remember for a very long time. Leo sat through the first part of the applause with his head bowed, his hands still resting in his lap. He looked like a man coming back from a long, faraway journey. Finally, he slowly stood up from the piano bench. He turned to face the room and gave a small, humble nod. It wasn't a proud bow, but a simple, "Thank you." This made people clap even harder. He began to walk back to his spot at the edge of the room, but he didn't get far. His colleagues surrounded him. They patted his shoulder gently. Their words came out in an excited rush. "Leo, that was incredible. I had no idea. All these years. What was that piece? It was so beautiful." Leo smiled, a real warm smile this time. It was a little shy, but it reached his eyes. He answered their questions quietly. "Thank you," he said. "It's a piece by Liszt." He didn't try to explain further. He just accepted their kindness with a gentle grace. While this was happening, the boss, Mr. Finch, finally pushed himself away from the wall. He looked like a man who had just woken up from a strange dream. The noise of the crowd seemed to buzz around him, but he moved through it as if in a bubble of silence. He still held his forgotten glass. He walked not towards the center of the excitement, but around the edge of it, his eyes fixed on Leo. He waited until the initial wave of people had thinned out a little. He saw Leo standing alone for a moment, catching his breath. This was his chance. He walked up, his steps slow and hesitant. The confident swagger he usually had was completely gone. "Leo," he said. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper. It was hard to hear over the noise of the room. Leo turned to look at him. His face was calm. There was no anger in his eyes, no "I told you so." There was just a quiet patience, as if he had been expecting this. The boss swallowed hard. He looked down at his shoes for a second, gathering his thoughts. When he looked up, his face was serious. He started, then stopped. I had no idea. The words felt weak and small, but they were the truest thing he could say. That was, "I don't even have the words. I am so sorry for what I said earlier. It was disrespectful. I was a fool." Leo listened, his head tilted slightly. He didn't interrupt. "All this time," the boss continued, his voice gaining a little strength, "I never knew. I never took the time to know." He gestured vaguely around the office, meaning the whole world they worked in. "We work together every day, and I see the reports and the numbers, but I never see the people." He looked directly at Leo. "I never saw you." He didn't bow. The moment for that grand, theatrical gesture had passed. It would have felt fake and silly now, like a bad joke. The real, meaningful thing was happening right here, in this quiet conversation surrounded by noise. His apology, his admission of being wrong, was a deeper bow than any physical one could ever be. Leo nodded slowly. He understood. "Thank you for saying that, sir," he said softly. "It was a long time ago. Another life. I don't play much anymore." He looked towards the piano. It was nice to remember what it felt like. Later that night, as the party was winding down, a small group of people sat with Leo near the fireplace. They were curious, and he was willing to share a little. "I went to music school when I was young," he explained, staring into the flames. "They said I had a gift. For a while it was all I did. Practice, perform, compete." He paused, a shadow of an old tiredness crossing his face. But the pressure, it was like a heavy weight. It started to crush the joy out of it. The music became a job, a difficult one. So I stopped. I walked away and found a quiet life. I like my quiet life. He didn't say it with sadness, just with simple truth. He had made a choice for his own peace. The next Monday, everything was back to normal in the office. The computers hummed, the phones rang, and the printers needed paper. Leo was there, as always, moving quietly through the chaos, fixing problems before anyone even noticed them. But something had changed. It wasn't a big, dramatic change. The boss didn't give a speech. Leo didn't get a promotion. The change was in the small things. The boss now spoke to Leo with a new tone in his voice, a tone of respect. He would ask, "Leo, what do you think about this idea?" And he would actually wait for the answer. He had learned to listen. People in the office looked at Leo differently. He wasn't just the nice man who fixed things anymore. He was Leo, the man with the secret. He was a reminder that everyone has a hidden story, a deep ocean under a calm surface. He was still the office manager, but he was also himself, fully and completely. And in that quiet office, that was the most powerful music of all.